I never thought a string of decorative lights could ruin my life. But when Barbara Henshaw from the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association showed up at my door with a violation notice on December 3rd, I knew I was in for a battle I never asked for. My name is Frank Sullivan, and I had just moved into this pristine suburban neighborhood in Naperville, Illinois, 6 months earlier. The house was beautiful, a modern 2-story colonial with white shutters and a perfectly manicured lawn that I maintained religiously. I worked as an electrical contractor, running my own small business that specialized in commercial and residential installations. The work was steady, the money was decent, and I thought I had finally found a place to settle down after my divorce finalized the previous spring. The trouble started innocently enough. I had spent the Saturday after Thanksgiving installing Icicle lights along my roofline. They were tasteful, simple white LED lights that hung down about 18 inches, creating that classic winter look without being gaudy. I had seen similar displays on at least a dozen other houses in the neighborhood, so I figured I was playing it safe. The installation took me about 3 hours, and I made sure everything was secured properly and all the electrical connections were weatherproof. As a licensed electrician, I took pride in doing things right. Barbara appeared on my doorstep 2 days later, a thin woman in her early 50s with highlighted blonde hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her face into a permanent expression of disapproval. She wore a beige pantsuit and carried a leather portfolio like she was about to close a business deal. "Mr. Sullivan," she said, not waiting for me to invite her in. "I am Barbara Henshaw, president of the Meadowbrook Estates HOA board. I need to discuss a violation with you." I stood in the doorway, confused. "A violation? What are you talking about?" She pulled out a piece of paper from her portfolio and handed it to me. "Your holiday decorations are in violation of Section 7, Paragraph 3 of the HOA covenants. All exterior decorations must be approved by the Architectural Review Committee at least 14 days prior to installation." I scanned the document, feeling my jaw tighten. "You have got to be kidding me. These are just Icicle lights. Half the neighborhood has them up already." "Those homeowners submitted proper applications and received approval," Barbara said, her voice clipped and professional. "You did not. The violation carries a fine of $50 per day until the issue is resolved. You have 48 hours to remove the lights or submit an application for approval, which will take approximately 2 weeks to process." 2 weeks. Christmas will be half over by then. "That is not my concern, Mr. Sullivan. The rules exist for a reason, and they apply to everyone equally." She turned to leave, then paused. "I would also recommend you review the entire covenant document. There are several other potential violations I noticed while conducting my inspection of your property." I watched her walk down my driveway to her silver Lexus, feeling an anger building in my chest that I had not experienced in years. This was exactly the kind of petty bureaucratic nonsense that drove me crazy. I closed the door and read through the violation notice more carefully. Sure enough, there at the bottom was a warning that failure to comply could result in a lien being placed on my property. That evening, I called my real estate agent, Marcus, who had helped me buy the house. "Did you know about this HOA approval process for Christmas lights?" I asked him. He sighed. "Frank, I gave you the entire HOA covenant book at closing. It is about 100 pages long. Most people do not read it. 100 pages of rules about what I can do with my own property. Welcome to suburban living, my friend. Look, my advice. Just take down the lights and submit the application. It is not worth fighting over." But I was not ready to back down. The next morning, I drove around the entire neighborhood, documenting every single house that had holiday decorations. I took photos on my phone, marking addresses and noting the types of displays. Out of the 83 houses in Meadowbrook Estates, 62 had some form of holiday decoration. I found wreaths, inflatable snowmen, projection lights, and yes, at least 20 houses with icicle lights nearly identical to mine. I spent the next few hours tracking down contact information for as many neighbors as I could. By late afternoon, I had confirmed that at least 15 homeowners with decorations had never submitted any application to the HOA. They had simply put up their lights, just like I had. None of them had received violation notices. Armed with this information, I showed up at the HOA office the following morning. The office was located in a small building near the neighborhood entrance, sharing space with a real estate office and a dental practice. Barbara was sitting behind a desk, typing on a computer when I walked in. "Mr. Sullivan," she said, barely looking up. "Have you removed the lights?" "No," I said, setting my phone on her desk. "But I have documented 15 other homes in this neighborhood with decorations who never submitted applications. Why am I being singled out?" Barbara glanced at my phone screen, then back at her computer. "Those homeowners submitted verbal requests that were approved informally." "That is not what they told me. I spoke to them. They did not know about any approval process." "Then they were mistaken," Barbara said, her tone making it clear the conversation was over. "Your fine is now at $150. I suggest you comply before it increases further." I left the office furious. This was not about rules or regulations. This was about power and control. I spent the rest of that day researching Illinois HOA laws and homeowner rights. What I found was both enlightening and frustrating. HOAs in Illinois had broad authority to enforce their covenants, but they also had to follow their own rules and procedures consistently. Selective enforcement was legally questionable, but proving it required documentation and often legal action. That weekend, I received a certified letter from the HOA attorney. The letter stated that my violation fine had now reached $350, and if I did not comply within 7 days, the HOA would begin the process of placing a lien on my property. The letter was signed by someone named Richard Pemberton from Pemberton and Associates, a law firm in downtown Chicago. I sat at my kitchen table, reading the letter 3 times. A lien on my property over Christmas lights. It seemed insane, but the legal language made it clear they were serious. I could fight this, but it would cost me thousands in legal fees with no guarantee of winning. Or I could just take down the lights and move on with my life. I chose option 3. I called every local news station in the Chicago area. 2 days later, a reporter named Jessica Chen from WGN News showed up at my house with a cameraman. I walked her through the entire situation, showed her my documentation of other homes, and explained the threat of a lien. She interviewed several of my neighbors on camera, many of whom expressed shock that I was being targeted, while they had never heard about any approval process. The story aired that evening during the 6 o'clock news. "Local homeowner faces thousands in fines over holiday lights," read the headline. The segment was about 3 minutes long and painted the HOA in an extremely unfavorable light. Barbara declined to comment on camera, but they showed footage of the HOA office and read portions of the violation notice. My phone started ringing immediately. Neighbors I had never met called to express support. A few local attorneys reached out offering to take my case pro bono for the publicity. But the most interesting call came around 8 that evening from a number I did not recognize. "Mr. Sullivan, this is Donald Krebs. I am on the HOA board with Barbara. I saw the news report, and I want you to know that not all of us supported this action. Can we meet? We agreed to meet the next morning at a coffee shop outside the neighborhood. Donald turned out to be a retired accountant in his mid-60s, with gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He ordered a black coffee and got straight to the point. "Barbara has been on a power trip for the past year," he said. "She became president after the previous president moved away, and she has been using the position to settle personal grudges and assert control. The rest of the board has been too intimidated or apathetic to challenge her." "So why target me specifically?" I asked. Donald hesitated. "Your house was purchased from the Hendersons. They had a dispute with Barbara about 3 years ago over a fence installation. Barbara wanted them to move it 6 inches because she claimed it was on common property. They refused and eventually proved she was wrong. She has had it out for that property ever since. When you bought it, I think she saw an opportunity to reassert control." "That is insane." "I know, but Barbara is very good at using the rules to get what she wants. The problem is she has overplayed her hand this time. The news coverage has other board members nervous. We are getting calls from residents who are now worried about their own decorations." "What can I do?" I asked. "Come to the board meeting next Tuesday. It is open to all residents. Bring your documentation and make your case publicly. I will back you up, and I think I can get at least one other board member to support you. That would be enough to overrule Barbara." I agreed, and we shook hands. As I drove home, I felt cautiously optimistic. Maybe this would actually work out. The HOA board meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a nice facility with a small gym, pool, and meeting rooms. When I arrived at 7 that evening, I was shocked to find the parking lot nearly full. The meeting room, which normally held maybe 15 people, was packed with at least 50 residents. Barbara sat at the front table with 4 other board members. She looked decidedly uncomfortable as she called the meeting to order. The first 30 minutes were routine business, approving minutes from the previous meeting and discussing snow removal contracts. Then came the section for homeowner comments. I stood up and Barbara's expression hardened. "Mr. Sullivan," she said, "you have 3 minutes." I walked to the front and laid out my case methodically. I explained the violation notice, showed photos of other homes with similar decorations, and presented written statements from neighbors who confirmed they had never submitted applications. I concluded by reading the relevant section of the Illinois Condominium Property Act, which required HOAs to enforce their rules consistently and fairly. "This is not about Christmas lights," I said. "This is about selective enforcement and abuse of power. I am asking the board to rescind my fines and violations, and to establish a clear, fair process for holiday decorations going forward." The room erupted in applause. Barbara looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. Donald spoke up immediately. "I move that we rescind all fines and violations issued to Mr. Sullivan regarding his holiday decorations, and that we form a committee to review our approval processes to ensure they are being applied consistently." Another board member, a woman named Patricia, seconded the motion. Barbara tried to argue, but it was clear she had lost control of the situation. The vote was 4-1 in my favor, with only Barbara opposing. As the meeting broke up, dozens of neighbors came up to shake my hand and thank me. Several mentioned they had been afraid to challenge the HOA on various issues, but seeing me stand up had inspired them. Donald clapped me on the shoulder. "Well done. I think you just changed this neighborhood for the better." I drove home feeling vindicated. The lights stayed up, the fines were gone, and Barbara had been publicly humiliated. I thought that was the end of it. I was very wrong. 3 days before Christmas, my phone rang at 6 in the morning. I answered groggily to hear Barbara's voice, but it sounded different, smaller. almost desperate. "Mr. Sullivan, this is Barbara Henshaw. I need to speak with you urgently about a matter." I sat up in bed, confused. "What could you possibly need to talk to me about? Not over the phone. Can you meet me at the clubhouse in an hour?" Something in her tone made me agree. I got dressed and drove over, expecting some kind of ambush or new violation. Instead, I found Barbara sitting alone in the parking lot in her Lexus, looking exhausted. She got out when she saw me and walked over. "Thank you for coming. I know you have no reason to help me, but I am in a terrible situation, and you are the only person who might be able to fix it." "What are you talking about?" She took a deep breath. "Every year, the HOA puts on a holiday light display at the neighborhood entrance. It is a big deal, something we have been doing for 15 years. We have these large illuminated figures, candy canes, a nativity scene, trees with lights, the whole works. The display is supposed to go up the week before Christmas." "Okay," I said slowly. "The contractor we have used for the past 10 years retired last month. I was supposed to hire someone new, but with everything that happened with your violation and the board meeting, I forgot. I just forgot. And now it is 3 days before Christmas, and I have called every electrical contractor and holiday lighting company within 50 miles. Nobody can do it. They are all booked solid." I stared at her, understanding dawning. "You want me to install your display? I will pay you double your normal rate, triple, whatever you want. The other board members do not know I forgot, and if the display does not go up, they will force me to resign. This display is a tradition. Families drive from other neighborhoods to see it. Please." The irony was almost too much to handle. The woman who had threatened to put a lien on my house over Icicle lights was now begging me to save her with my electrical skills. Every fiber of my being wanted to tell her no, to let her face the consequences of her own incompetence and petness. But I did not. Maybe it was the Christmas spirit, or maybe I just wanted to prove I was the bigger person. "Let me see the display and assess what needs to be done." Barbara's face flooded with relief. "Thank you. Oh God, thank you." We drove to a storage unit on the edge of town where the HOA kept the decorations. When Barbara opened the unit, I understood why she was panicking. This was not a simple display. There were 10 large illuminated figures, each about 8 feet tall. There were 6 spiral trees covered in lights, a massive star, dozens of candy canes, and an elaborate nativity scene with life-sized figures. All of it needed to be transported, assembled, and properly wired. "This is at least a 3-day job with a full crew," I said. "I only have you," Barbara said quietly, "and 3 days." I pulled out my phone and started making calls. I reached out to 2 guys who worked with me on larger projects, explaining the situation. Neither was available. Then I called my brother Derek, who was visiting from Milwaukee for the holidays. He was not an electrician, but he could follow instructions and lift heavy objects. "You want me to spend my Christmas vacation installing lights for the HOA lady who tried to screw you over," Derek said. "I will buy you a very expensive bottle of whiskey. Make it 2 bottles and you have a deal." Over the next 72 hours, Derek and I worked like madmen. We started that afternoon, loading everything into my work truck and his rental. The neighborhood entrance was a large landscaped area with brick columns and a decorative fountain. We mapped out where everything would go, then began the installation. The first challenge was the illuminated figures. They were old, probably 15 years old like Barbara had said, and the wiring was in terrible shape. Several figures had broken bulbs, corroded connections, and frayed wires. I spent hours on the first day just repairing the figures before we could even start installing them. Barbara showed up every few hours to check on progress, bringing coffee and sandwiches. She tried to make small talk, but I kept the conversation focused on the work. I was doing this job, but I was not ready to forgive her. By the end of day one, we had 4 figures installed and working. Derek and I worked until almost midnight, our breath visible in the cold December air, our fingers numb despite our gloves. Day 2 was the trees and the nativity scene. The spiral trees were easier, but the nativity scene was a nightmare. The figures were heavy fiberglass, and several had cracks that needed repair. Worse, the electrical system for the scene was a mess of extension cords and power strips, none of it properly weatherproofed or grounded. "This is a fire hazard," I told Barbara when she arrived with lunch. "I need to completely rewire this section." "Whatever it takes," she said. "Do you need to buy materials? I will give you the HOA credit card." I sent Derek to the hardware store with a list while I continued working. By evening, I had installed a proper outdoor electrical panel with GFCI protection and run new weatherproof wiring to each figure in the nativity scene. It was not pretty, but it was safe and up to code. Day 3 was Christmas Eve, and we still had the star, the candy canes, and all the final touches to complete. Derek and I started at sunrise, racing against time. The star was the centerpiece, a massive 8-foot illuminated star that mounted on a 20-foot pole. Getting it positioned and secured properly took 3 hours. The candy canes were simpler but tedious. There were 3 dozen of them, each one needing to be staked into the frozen ground and connected to the lighting circuit. By 2 in the afternoon, we were exhausted but almost done. That is when things went sideways. I was doing a final check of all the connections when I noticed something odd about the nativity scene. The wiring I had installed was correct, but the original wiring behind the figures ran to a junction box I had not opened. Curious, I unscrewed the cover. Inside was a rat's nest of illegal connections, but that was not what caught my attention. There were 2 circuits running from this junction box. One powered the nativity scene. The other ran underground toward the street. "Derek, come look at this," I called. My brother trudged over, covered in dirt from staking candy canes. "What's up? Where does that second circuit go?" We followed the conduit, which led to a small utility box near the street. When I opened it, I found a meter bypass. Someone had illegally tapped into the municipal power supply, routing electricity around the meter so it would not be billed. "Holy crap," Derek said. "That is major theft." I pulled out my phone and took photos. This was not just a violation of electrical code. This was stealing electricity from the city, probably for years. The HOA had been running this entire display on stolen power. Barbara arrived a few minutes later for her usual check-in. I showed her what I had found, and the color drained from her face. "I did not know about this," she said immediately. "I swear I had no idea." "Who installed the original system?" I asked. "A contractor named Mike something. This was before I joined the board. He has been retired for years." "Well, someone knew about it, and the HOA has been benefiting from it." Barbara sat down on the curb, looking like she might be sick. "What do? We disconnect the illegal tap and run everything through a proper metered connection. And you need to report this to the city and probably a lawyer." "But the display will work fine on a proper connection. It will just cost the HOA money for electricity, like it should have all along." We spent the next 2 hours disconnecting the bypass and installing a temporary connection to a nearby metered outlet with the property owner's permission. I made it clear to Barbara that this was not a permanent solution, but it would get the display running legally for this year. By the time we finished, it was almost 7 in the evening. Christmas Eve. Derek and I were frozen, exhausted, and covered in dirt. But when I flipped the switch and the entire display lit up, I had to admit it looked beautiful. The illuminated figures glowed, the stars shone brilliantly against the darkening sky, and the nativity scene was peaceful and elegant. Cars were already starting to slow down to look. Families were getting out to take photos. Whatever my feelings about Barbara and the HOA, this display clearly meant something to the community. Barbara approached me, holding an envelope. "This is your payment, plus a significant bonus, and I need to say something." I waited. "I have been horrible to you." The violation, the fines, all of it was petty and mean-spirited. I convinced myself I was just enforcing the rules, but Donald was right. I was on a power trip, and I took out my frustrations on you because of an old grudge with the previous owners. You had every right to refuse to help me, but you did not. You worked yourself to exhaustion to save a tradition for a community that watched me try to bully you. I do not deserve your kindness, but I am grateful for it." It was the most honest thing I had ever heard her say. I took the envelope. "I did not do this for you, Barbara. I did it for the neighborhood, for the families who look forward to this display, but I appreciate you saying that. I am going to resign as HOA president," she continued, "after the holidays. This whole experience has made me realize I was doing more harm than good, and I am going to make sure the board pays the city back for the stolen electricity with interest. We will figure out how much was taken and make it right." I nodded. "That is the right thing to do." Derek and I packed up our tools and headed home. My brother was quiet for a while, then said, "You know, I thought you were crazy for helping her, but that was pretty decent of you." "Yeah, well, it is Christmas Eve. Seemed like the right time to be the bigger person. Christmas Day was quiet." I slept late, made myself a big breakfast, and then drove around the neighborhood looking at all the holiday lights, including mine. The icicle lights I had installed were still up, twinkling merrily in the morning sun. They looked good. The week after Christmas, I received a formal letter from the HOA board. It thanked me for my work on the holiday display and informed me that Barbara had submitted her resignation as president. Donald Krebs was the interim president, and the board was in the process of reviewing all HOA policies and procedures to ensure fair and consistent enforcement. The letter also mentioned that the HOA had contacted the city about the electrical theft and was working with authorities to resolve the matter. I also received a check for $18,000, far more than I would have charged for the installation work. When I called Donald about it, he laughed. "Barbara insisted. She said you saved her from complete humiliation and probably a lawsuit. The board agreed you earned every penny." 2 weeks into January, I got a call from a detective with the Naperville Police Department. Detective Sarah Martinez wanted to discuss the electrical theft at the neighborhood entrance. I met her at a local diner and walked her through everything I had found. "The problem is determining who knew about the theft and when," Detective Martinez explained. "The contractor who installed it is retired in Arizona and claims he does not remember the details. The HOA board has changed multiple times over 15 years. We are trying to get financial records to estimate how much electricity was stolen." "What kind of charges are we talking about?" I asked. "Theft of services, possibly organized retail theft if the amount is high enough. It depends on the total value." Over the next month, the investigation continued. Utility experts estimated that the display had stolen approximately $43,000 worth of electricity over 15 years. The current HOA board, now led by Donald, agreed to pay full restitution plus penalties, which came to almost $60,000. The city agreed not to press criminal charges against the HOA as an entity, since the current board was cooperating fully, and the original perpetrators could not be clearly identified. The contractor who installed the system, Mike Daringer, was eventually tracked down in Phoenix. He was 72 years old and claimed he could not remember anything about the installation. Without clear evidence that he had intentionally installed the bypass, rather than simply doing shoddy work, prosecutors decided not to pursue charges. It was frustrating, but sometimes that is how these things end. In February, the HOA held a special election for a new president. Donald did not want the position permanently, so several residents threw their names in. To my complete surprise, I got a call from Patricia, one of the board members who had voted in my favor. "Frank, we want you to run for HOA president." I almost laughed. "You cannot be serious." "We are completely serious. You stood up to abuse of power. You helped the community even when you had every reason not to, and you are detail-oriented and fair. Those are exactly the qualities we need. I have a business to run. I do not have time to deal with HOA politics. The time commitment is about 5 hours a week, mostly evening meetings. We will get the policies streamlined so it is not a huge burden. Please at least think about it." I did think about it, for about a week. Then I talked to Donald, who convinced me that the neighborhood needed someone who would focus on building community rather than enforcing petty rules. I agreed to run, mostly because I figured no one would vote for me anyway. I won with 68% of the vote. My first act as HOA president was to completely overhaul the holiday decoration policy. The new rule was simple. Residents could put up any holiday decorations they wanted between November 1st and January 15th, as long as they were safely installed and did not create hazards. No approval needed. No applications. No fees. My second act was to establish clear guidelines for what actually required HOA approval. Major exterior changes like additions or fences, color changes to houses, and any modifications to common areas. Everything else was fair game. My third act was to set term limits for board positions. No one could serve as president for more than 2 consecutive years. I had seen what happened when someone got too comfortable with power, and I was not going to let it happen again. Barbara moved away in March. She sold her house and relocated somewhere in Florida. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that the stress of the whole situation had contributed to her decision to leave. Part of me felt bad for her, but mostly I was just relieved. She had created her own problems, and the consequences were hers to bear. The neighborhood entrance display came down in mid-January, and I supervised the storage of all the equipment. In March, I worked with the board to hire a proper contractor for the following year, someone licensed and insured who would install everything safely and legally. We budgeted for the actual electricity costs, which came out of the HOA dues. Some residents grumbled about the increase, but when I explained that we had been stealing power for 15 years and were lucky not to face criminal charges, the grumbling stopped. Spring brought new challenges. We had to deal with a drainage issue in the common areas, negotiate a new landscaping contract, and handle a dispute between neighbors over a tree that was dropping leaves into a pool. But these were normal problems, the kind that could be resolved with communication and compromise rather than threats and fines. In May, I was at the hardware store picking up supplies for a job when I ran into Jessica Chen, the reporter who had covered my original story. She recognized me immediately. "Frank Sullivan, how are things in the HOA world?" I gave her a brief update on everything that had happened, including my unexpected role as president. She was fascinated. "That is an amazing follow-up story. Would you be willing to do another interview?" The second news segment aired during the evening news in late May. From victim to victor, local man transforms HOA after holiday light dispute was the headline. It covered my election, the policy changes, and the resolution of the electrical theft investigation. The segment ended with Jessica standing in front of the neighborhood entrance. Sometimes standing up for what is right does not just solve your own problem, she said to the camera. Sometimes it changes an entire community for the better. The segment went semi-viral locally, getting shared thousands of times on social media. I got calls from other HOA presidents asking for advice on reforming their own associations. A lawyer from Chicago contacted me about consulting on HOA disputes. I even got a speaking invitation from a real estate conference. I declined most of it. I was not trying to become some kind of HOA reform crusader. I just wanted to live in a neighborhood where people treated each other fairly and did not get threatened with liens over Christmas lights. By the time December rolled around again, I had served as HOA president for 10 months. I was exhausted but proud of what we had accomplished. The neighborhood felt different, more relaxed. People were not afraid of getting violation notices for minor infractions. Board meetings were productive rather than combative. We had even started a neighborhood social committee that organized block parties and community events. The first week of December, I put up my Icicle lights again. Same lights, same installation, same house. But this time, no one showed up with a violation notice. Instead, neighbors stopped by to compliment the display and ask where I had bought the lights. The professional contractor we hired installed the neighborhood entrance display the week before Christmas, and it looked even better than the previous year. The lights were brighter, the figures were positioned more thoughtfully, and everything was safely and legally connected. Families came from all over the area to see it, just like they had in years past. On Christmas Eve, the board organized a community gathering at the entrance to officially light the display. About 100 residents showed up, bundled in coats and scarves. Donald said a few words about community and tradition. Patricia talked about the importance of treating neighbors with respect. Then they asked me to flip the switch. As the display lit up and the crowd applauded, I found myself thinking about Barbara. About how her need for control and her inability to let go of old grudges had nearly destroyed something beautiful. About how easily power could corrupt even well-meaning people. About how important it was to have systems in place that prevented any one person from wielding too much authority. But I also thought about redemption and second chances. Barbara had apologized, paid restitution, and ultimately done the right thing even though it cost her. She had made serious mistakes, but she had tried to fix them. That counted for something. My term as HOA president ended the following spring. I chose not to run for re-election, feeling that I had done what I set out to do, and it was time for someone else to lead. A woman named Jennifer, a retired teacher with endless patience and excellent organizational skills, won the election. I stayed on the board as a regular member, helping with technical issues and major projects, but letting Jennifer handle the day-to-day leadership. The Icicle lights became a permanent fixture on my house every holiday season. They were a reminder of everything that had happened, of the absurd fight that had spiraled into something much larger. But they were also a reminder that sometimes the right thing to do is not the easy thing. That standing up to injustice matters, even when the injustice is small and petty. That communities are built by people who care enough to fight for fairness and then work to create something better. I still run into former board members occasionally. Donald retired to South Carolina but visits his daughter in the neighborhood sometimes. Patricia became good friends with my brother Derek, who ended up moving to the area the following year. Even the neighbors who had been afraid to challenge Barbara have become more engaged, attending meetings and volunteering for committees. The electrical theft investigation officially closed in June of that year. The city accepted the HOA's restitution payment and issued a statement about the importance of proper electrical installations and regular inspections of community infrastructure. Mike Daringer, the contractor, sent a letter to the HOA apologizing for any problems his original installation may have caused, though he still maintained he did not remember the specific details. It was not a satisfying resolution, but it was closure of a sort. As for me, the whole experience changed how I thought about community and civic engagement. I had moved to Meadowbrook Estates, looking for a quiet place to rebuild my life after my divorce. Instead, I found myself in the middle of a battle over holiday lights that revealed deep problems with how the neighborhood was run. I could have walked away, taken down my lights, and avoided the hassle. But I did not, and that decision led to real change. The following December, as I installed my Icicle lights for the third year, I noticed several new houses in the neighborhood had similar displays. The tradition was spreading, not because anyone was forcing it, but because people genuinely enjoyed it. That was how it should be. Communities built on choice and shared values rather than rules and punishment. I never heard from Barbara again after she moved to Florida. I hope she found peace there, hope she learned from what happened and became a better person. Grudges and bitterness only poison the person holding them, and I had no interest in carrying that weight. On Christmas Eve of my third year in the neighborhood, Jennifer organized another community gathering at the entrance display. The tradition had stuck, and now it was one of the highlights of the holiday season. As I stood with my neighbors, watching children run around the illuminated figures and families taking photos, I felt something I had not felt in years. I felt like I was home. The Icicle lights on my house glowed in the distance, visible from where we stood. Those lights had started a war I never wanted to fight. They had revealed corruption and abuse of power. They had forced me to stand up for myself and ultimately led to me taking on leadership I never sought. And in the end, they had helped transform a neighborhood ruled by fear and petty enforcement into a community built on mutual respect. All because I refused to back down over something as simple as holiday lights. Sometimes the smallest battles lead to the biggest victories. Sometimes standing your ground over a principle, even when everyone tells you it is not worth the fight, is exactly what needs to happen. And sometimes the person who threatens to destroy you ends up being the one who needs you most. I learned all of that from a string of LED lights, and a woman named Barbara who thought she could use rules and regulations to control people. She was wrong, and the neighborhood was better for it. As the evening ended and neighbors started heading home, Jennifer approached me. "Thank you for everything you did to make this possible," she said. "The neighborhood would be a very different place if you had just taken down those lights." "I almost did," I admitted. "It would have been easier. But you did not. That made all the difference." I drove home that night with Christmas music playing softly on the radio, the streets of Meadowbrook Estates lined with holiday lights of every variety. No two houses looked exactly alike. Some had simple white lights like mine. Others had elaborate multi-colored displays. Some had inflatable decorations. Others had projection lights. It was chaotic and beautiful and completely unregulated. It was perfect. My Icicle lights were still glowing when I pulled into my driveway. I sat in my truck for a moment, looking at them, remembering that day Barbara had shown up with her violation notice. It felt like a lifetime ago, though it had been less than 3 years. The lights had been worth fighting for, not because they were particularly special or important in themselves, but because they represented something larger. The right to make decisions about your own property. The expectation of fair and consistent treatment. The belief that rules should serve the community rather than the egos of those enforcing them. I got out of my truck and walked to my front door, the icicle lights casting a soft white glow across my yard. Tomorrow was Christmas, and I had nowhere to be and nothing urgent to do. Derek and his family were coming over for dinner, and a few neighbors had been invited as well. It would be a good day, but tonight, I just wanted to sit in my living room, look at my lights, and appreciate how far I had come. From a divorced guy looking for a fresh start, to an HOA violation target, to a community leader who had helped reform an entire system. Life had taken some unexpected turns, but I had navigated them as best I could. The icicle lights would come down in mid-January, carefully packed away for next year. The neighborhood entrance display would be stored properly, ready for the next contractor to install it the following December. The HOA would continue operating under the new policies, treating residents with respect rather than suspicion. And I would go back to running my electrical contracting business, taking on projects and solving problems. But I would also stay involved in the community, attending board meetings and volunteering for projects. Because I had learned that being part of a community meant more than just living in proximity to other people. It meant standing up when things were wrong, working to make them better, and helping to create the kind of place where everyone could feel at home. All of that from a simple string of icicle lights and a woman who tried to use them as a weapon. Barbara had wanted to punish me, to assert her authority and put me in my place. Instead, she had inadvertently started a chain of events that led to her own downfall and the transformation of the entire neighborhood. I poured myself a glass of whiskey and raised it toward the window, toward those icicle lights that had changed everything. "Merry Christmas," I said to no one in particular, "and thank you for being worth the fight." The lights twinkled in response, steady and bright against the dark winter night. They were just lights, just decorations, just a simple holiday display, but they had meant so much more, and that in the end was the whole point.